Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's Everything Dis Virtual Showcase, Transforming Workplace Conflict. Before we get started, let me tell you about Carver Associates. We're an international management consulting firm with over 30 years of experience providing transformational learning and development, helping clients change behaviors and improve culture. My name is Ty Miller. I'm the COO of Carver Associates and a consultant, facilitator, and coach to our clients. Today's agenda takes a closer look at conflict's drag on today's workplace. We all know that conflict is a normal part of our working lives, but what impact does it have on engagement, retention, efficiency, and even performance? And because conflict is an inevitable part of our work days, we'll dig into the difference between conflict resolution, something that typically occurs after a conflict incident, and productive conflict, an opportunity to make the most of the conflict incident in the moment it happens. Next, the majority of this on-demand webinar will be spent showcasing the Everything Disc Productive Conflict learning experience. So you can all get a sense of how this training solution works and why it is a viable way to address some of the negative impacts conflict can have both on people in the workplace, as well as the broader culture and performance of the organization. From there, we'll have a look at a case study from one of the largest Everything Disc Productive Conflict users, the United Brotherhood of Carpenters. And finally, we'll end on some next steps and how you can get in touch with us for any questions. To get started, I have a question for all of you to consider. What's the first word or phrase that comes to mind when you think of conflict? If you're like most people, some of the words here on the screen might align with your answer to this question. In fact, Wiley, the publisher of Everything Disc, conducted a 2019 study asking more than 12,000 professionals, from individual contributors to executives, the same question. And their responses were pretty much what you'd expect. Things like drama, by far number one, disagreement, stress, gossip, negativity, arguments, toxic, unnecessary, tension, inefficient, petty, frustrations, egos, on and on. What's interesting about all of these words is that the general sentiment around workplace conflict is almost exclusively negative. In fact, of the 12,000 plus survey respondents, 90% of the responses were negative. In general, people simply do not like conflict. And this is really no surprise. Think of your own experiences with conflict in the workplace. They are likely littered with toxic behaviors that not only provoke and extend conflict, but also wreak havoc on our collective workplace cultures. Things like drama, which is displaying an over-the-top reaction to a situation, or gossiping, when someone engages in idle talk about someone else's private affairs, passive aggression, where we express our negative feelings in a subtle or indirect way, exclusion, when someone deliberately leaves someone out. Odds are you've experienced and potentially even engaged in more than one of them. And while this list is only a small sampling, destructive behaviors like this present a measurable drag on engagement, efficiency, retention, and performance in today's workplace. In that same Wiley study, 70% of managers, supervisors, directors, and executives said that interpersonal conflict negatively impacts efficiency in their departments. And when we think about efficiency, we're often thinking about our most valuable resource in our lives today, and that is time. When it comes to time spent, the Wiley study found that on average, managers, directors, and executives spend an average of 3.2 hours per week dealing with workplace conflict. If you consider a standard 48-hour work week year, that's nearly a month of time spent dealing with conflict rather than performance-driving initiatives. But conflict impacts more than our time and overall efficiency. When we think about the employee experience and overall job satisfaction, 69% of respondents said their job satisfaction would improve if their coworkers handled interpersonal conflicts more effectively. And finally, destructive conflict has more to do with employee turnover than you might think. Of the 12,000 plus people that were surveyed, 40% said they left their jobs in the past due to unhealthy personal conflict on the job. Take a minute to think about how difficult it is to find a new job. That's how intolerable conflict was for 2 out of every 5 people. And while we're talking about major life changes resulting from conflict, we're also talking about one of the most critical components to a strong organization, and that is an organization's ability to retain its employees. And quite frankly, organizations can't afford to lose their people, especially to something like conflict. According to the Work Institute, each employee departure cost about 1/3 of that worker's annual earnings, including expenses such as recruiter fees, temporary replacement workers, and lost productivity. The takeaway is this: conflict has a huge impact on the employee experience, the culture of an organization, and ultimately performance. And while it's uncomfortable, it's also an unavoidable part of every workplace. In order for organizations to thrive in today's modern working environment, they must teach their workforce how to effectively navigate conflict. And that's what Wiley and Everything Disc has set out to do. And as a research-based company, Wiley looked at all the challenges faced by both professionals and organizations when it comes to conflict. And they created a solution that would actually help people deal with conflict in a much more productive way. And before we get into the solution, I want to make a distinction about the how to address conflict. The question of how is often addressed through conflict resolution. But what is conflict resolution? It is the process of resolving a dispute without confrontation. It's reactively addressing conflict after the fact. It often involves negotiation, mediation, or arbitration after a conflict has occurred, often with a third party. And it aims to eliminate conflict with a step-by-step process. Now, there's nothing wrong with conflict resolution, but it assumes the conflict has already happened and that 2 people must take their precious time and energy after the fact to resolve a dispute. Wiley has taken an approach that, rather than resolving conflict, how can we teach people how to effectively navigate conflict is through the lens of productive conflict, which breaks down as number 1, an open exchange of different ideas and opinions. Productively engaging in conflict in the moment. All parties feel equally heard, respected, and unafraid to voice dissenting opinions. Strives to reach a mutually comfortable solution. And many believe that conflict, if engaged productively, is integral to organizational success. When 2 or more people are able to productively engage in conflict in the moment it's happening, they can debate the issues in front of them and solve tough problems much more efficiently. Today's struggles lead to tomorrow's breakthroughs is the paradigm of productive conflict. But engaging in conflict the moment it's happening does not remove the discomfort that comes along with conflict. So the question becomes, what does it take to create an environment where people engage in productive conflict? What are the success ingredients? At Carver Associates, we believe the recipe for productive conflict occurs when each individual understands themselves and others in conflict, recognizes destructive thoughts and habitual responses, catches and reframes destructive thoughts when the conflict occurs, chooses a more productive response, and maintains a commitment to finding a mutually comfortable solution. So how do we bring these ingredients together? Let me introduce you to Everything Disc Productive Conflict. This classroom training and personalized learning experience increases self-awareness around conflict behaviors and helps participants effectively respond to the uncomfortable and unavoidable challenges of workplace conflict. Rather than focus on a step-by-step process for conflict resolution, this training program combines the personalized insights of DISC with the proven science of cognitive behavioral therapy to help participants recognize and transform their destructive habits into more productive responses. This is an accessible and scalable training program that aims to teach every person in your workplace how to effectively navigate conflict, ultimately improving workplace relationships and results. For those of you who are less familiar with Everything DISC, each learning experience, including Everything DISC Productive Conflict, follows a transformational learning model. It starts with a computer adaptive psychometric assessment. The results of the assessment are delivered to the learner through a personalized narrative style profile. The profile is brought to life in a facilitation experience that engages and educates, creating aha moments that inspire real behavior change. And finally, we know much of what is learned in the classroom is not applied unless it's practiced. So a suite of followed resources are available to make lasting behavior change possible. I'm now going to walk you through each of these steps to showcase the Everything DISC productive conflict learning experience. Let's start with the assessment. Powered by 40 plus years of assessment research and expertise, each Everything DISC personality assessment combines adaptive testing and sophisticated algorithms to deliver precise insights to each participant. The Everything DISC productive conflict assessment breaks down into two categories of questions. The first set of questions are considered core questions and are used to determine the participant's DISC style. From there, the participant is asked a second set of questions considered conflict questions. These questions are used to determine the participant's behavioral priorities during conflict. The core questions the learner will answer are the same for any Everything DISC application, including Everything DISC productive conflict. To give you all an example, some questions the learner will see include, I'm accommodating, or I'm methodical. And all of these questions are answered using a 5-point Likert scale response methodology. Individuals simply indicate whether they strongly disagree, are neutral, agree, or strongly agree. With each of these statements, it uses computer adaptive testing. So depending on the learner's responses, they'll be presented different questions. This approach makes the tests shorter for most learners, especially if they are consistent in their responses. More importantly, this approach makes for a very precise and accurate result. In fact, Everything DISC assessments have earned a 90% accuracy rating from learners worldwide. In addition to core questions, the learner will be asked questions that are specific to conflict. For example, when I'm in a conflict, I confront the topic without waiting. Or when I'm in a conflict, I'm still very empathetic with the other person. The same Likert scale response system is applied so learners can self-select how strongly they agree or disagree with these statements. This portion of the assessment is designed to identify the learner's behaviors in conflict, regardless of personality, to ensure an even more precise and personalized experience for teaching productive conflict. In total, the assessment will take an individual about 10 to 15 minutes to complete. And for those learners who have already taken an Everything DISC assessment, we can pull your core question data forward so those learners don't have to re-respond to those questions. Once we have everyone's data for Everything DISC productive conflict, we use that data to generate a personalized profile. That personalized profile is then used in a facilitated learning process, which is generally 4 hours, but can be adapted to meet the specific needs and time requirements of your organization. These two elements are used together, the personalized profile and the facilitated experience, to create a personalized learning for your learners. And I'm going to step you through a high-level overview of what this experience looks like and how it works. The Everything DISC productive conflict experience is broken down into 3 parts. In the first part, the facilitator will lead the learners through a discovery process using their personalized profile. Learners will learn and understand their DISC style, as well as their responses to conflict, while also opening their eyes to other DISC styles and how those styles tend to respond to conflict. In the second part, the facilitator will spend time helping learners recognize those destructive conflict responses we just saw a little while ago, things like drama, exclusion, pettiness, etc. Now, these often happen without us thinking about it. They are our normal go-to behaviors. And in order for a learner to make the transition from destructive conflict to productive conflict, they have to first recognize their own destructive tendencies when faced with conflict. Part 3 focuses on change. It's an action-oriented section that helps the learner change their destructive behaviors and consciously choose more productive responses. It's personalized and pragmatic to help make this change possible. I'll cover each one of these parts, starting with part 1, understanding yourself and others in conflict using DISC. Okay, so part 1, DISC and conflict. This helps learners first understand conflict using Everything DISC productive conflict. From there, they'll explore their own DISC style in the context of conflict. Then finally, they'll learn about the other DISC styles in the context of conflict. Let's take a look at the introductory video to part 1.
This is DISC, a simple tool to help you understand yourself and others. It describes 4 basic styles: D, dominance; I, influence; S, steadiness; and C, conscientiousness. Each of these styles experiences and processes conflict differently. Here's how it works. First, everyone has a dot. That dot tells you your DISC style. And these words around the circle, they're called priorities. Together, they tell your story in conflict. For instance, people with the D style are direct and tough-minded. They have a strong need to shape their environment. So in conflict, they often take control, overshadowing others. Because they're assertive, they speak up about problems and stick up for themselves. And they can sometimes be forceful, justifying their side of the story when they're convinced they're right. People with the I style tend to be lively and enthusiastic. In conflict, they openly express their frustration or hurt, often needing to release what's building inside. And they assert themselves, hoping that they'll be acknowledged and heard, although sometimes this overwhelms others instead. And because they want reassurance, they may revisit the conversation until they feel the relationship is okay. Those with the S style are generally patient and even-tempered. Since they care so much about harmony, they're often quick to compromise or accommodate others in conflict. They worry about possible damage to the relationship, and so they'll look for ways to reassure the other person, hoping for the same in return. And they also want stability, so they often project calm and appear to agree on the surface, even if resentment is simmering underneath. And finally, the C style tends to be analytical and private. Because they prize objectivity, they rely on facts during a conflict and may dismiss more emotional points of view that make them uncomfortable. When emotions do start to rise, even just a little, it can threaten the stability they crave. And rather than provoke an outburst, they may withdraw or just stay quiet. They work to frame any disagreement rationally, creating intricate, logical justifications for their position. Now, in the real world, of course, your dot can be between two styles, such as in the area between I and S. And you can have 4 or even 5 priorities. For example, in addition to reassurance, expression, and harmony, you might also share the priority of objectivity with your C coworkers. Ultimately, DISC is not only a way for you to understand yourself better, but also a tool to appreciate different approaches to conflict. Compared to you, the situations that stress other people out might be completely different. But when you start to understand the different needs and motivations behind each DISC style, that's when conflict starts to shift from being a headache to actually being productive.
To help us look at the personalized profile and facilitation experience, I'd like to introduce you to Ruby. Ruby is a D style. She can be insensitive at times. She tends to create win-lose situations, and she can become dismissive of others when something goes wrong. We'll take a look at this learning experience through the lens of Ruby and her personalized profile. Ruby took the Everything Disproductive Conflict assessment, and then her profile was generated with the results of her assessment. One of the first things done on page 2 of the profile is grounding and level setting. We start off ensuring that there is a common understanding of conflict. The profile defines conflict for the learner, defined as a difference of opinions involving strong emotions. From there, it shares the purpose of Everything Disproductive Conflict, to improve self-awareness around conflict behaviors, then helping learners curb destructive thoughts and behaviors so that conflict can become more productive, ultimately improving workplace results and relationships. After that, the profile introduces the Cornerstone Principles, which if you have experience with other Everything DISC learning experiences, this will be familiar. Cornerstone Principles are designed to level set the experience, ensuring that the experience is positive and respectful for everyone. They also put the responsibility of the learning in that learner's hands by helping them see that their responses to conflict situations are in their control. And while they cannot control other people's responses, this can help them better understand other people's styles and conflict behaviors and how they differ from their own. Once we have people grounded in the Cornerstone Principles, then we introduce the DISC model, but in the context of conflict. Even if people are familiar with everything DISC, the model points out that people respond differently to conflict. For example, D styles in conflict tend to focus on logic and victory. I styles in conflict tend to focus on expression and feelings. S styles in conflict tend to focus on feelings and consensus. And C styles in conflict tend to focus on justice and logic. At this point, we turn our attention to the individual, and page 3 is where the personalized nature of the profile comes alive. The learner first discovers their DISC style. You see Ruby is a D style, and the learner receives not simply a data dump, but a narrative description of their DISC style in conflict. This narrative goes deeper than the DISC style by introducing the learner to the personalized conflict DISC map and their specific behavioral priorities in conflict. The dot placement indicates how strongly inclined a learner is to that DISC style's behavioral priorities and tendencies. Now, from there, the shading indicates that individual specific priorities based on their assessment results. Everyone's going to have at least 3 priorities. Now, some people can even have a 4th and even 5th priority depending on their assessment results. Now, looking at Ruby, her priorities include justification, control, assertion, and objectivity, and additional priorities she shares with her C-style counterparts. The narrative delivers a paragraph dedicated to each priority and has over 180 iterations. So it truly is personalized far beyond the DISC style itself. In the facilitation, learners are asked to review the narrative. We ask them, what rang true? What was surprising? Did you have any aha moments? They are asked to individualize it to themselves even further by checking 3 sentences that strongly resonate with them and Xing out any sentences that are less aligned with their self-perception in conflict. Typically, we see a lot of check marks, but it's important to help the learner own their data. Page 4 introduces the learner to their DISC style in conflict, starting with sharing what is important to them during conflict. Here, the learner is introduced to a list of approaches that this learner may value during conflict. The facilitation asks the learner to check the top 3 that resonate with them. For Ruby, some might include standing up for your point of view, winning arguments, or using sharp critical thinking skills. On the flip side of valued approaches are approaches or behaviors that the learner may find stressful during conflict or drains their energy during conflict. Like the valued approaches, the facilitation asks the learner to check the stressors that resonate most with them. Page 4, you can see, helps the learner deepen their own understanding of themselves through the lens of conflict, an important first step in making behavior change. Part 1 concludes with a summary of DISC and conflict. The learner summarizes the destructive and productive tendencies in conflict by DISC style. At this point in the facilitated learning session, people are getting a strong sense of themselves in the context of conflict, and they start to see that there may be alternatives to many of their habitual responses in conflict. Pages 6 to 9 turn the attention to interacting effectively with all 4 DISC styles. These are all written to the learner's DISC style, so the pages on the screen are specific to Ruby's D style perspective. In a sense, these are reference pages for the learner to go back to over and over again. So for Ruby, she chooses to focus on a coworker named Dave. Dave has a C style, and he tends to keep his emotions out of discussions. He prefers logical debates, and he prides himself on his critical thinking skills. In this example, Ruby would focus specifically on page 9. She'd be presented information about what drives Dave in conflict. The top half of each page shares basic information about what drives the C style in conflict. From there, the bottom half of each page shares how that compares to her D style. So for Ruby, she sees that Dave is similar in his analytical and logic approach, but is less interested in controlling the outcome or being forthright and forceful. The last section starts to help Ruby understand how she might have productive conflict with that style, with very specific suggestions like using logic rather than force, and give Dave time and space to double check their misgivings. The facilitation goes deeper into these pages by asking learners to partner up and read the top 2 sections. From there, the facilitator asks, are there any striking differences in your approaches to conflict? What are they? What would be helpful? Anything not listed? To end part one, we have a nice summary that gives a high-level summary of each DISC style in conflict. Then to cement the learning, the profile and the facilitation encourage the learner to reflect on a conflict situation where they could have handled their response differently and what impact their DISC style had on the situation. In Ruby's case, there was an incident with Dave. Ruby's team had a deadline on a project, and she had a plan. When she presented the plan, Dave was concerned with some of the logistics and the details around the plan. Ruby didn't think the team had time to consider all this and pushed back on his questions. Dave wanted to ensure the team got things right before moving forward, but Ruby dismissed his opinions and the two became argumentative and Ruby walked out. In this example, Ruby now knows how she reacts in conflict. She's ready to recognize her destructive behaviors and understands what triggers them. Awareness is the first step, but recognizing your destructive behaviors is where the hard work starts to come in. Part two of our learning experience focuses on three things. First, connecting these automatic thoughts that we have to behaviors and understanding how they influence our behaviors without us realizing it. Number two, identifying and understanding those destructive behaviors that they engage in most often. And three, learning to recognize your automatic thoughts during conflict. Let's take a look at the introductory video to part two here.
Yelling, caving in, gossiping. Whether it's a brief dispute or a lingering issue, we've all done things in conflict that we're not proud of. We know they don't help, so why do we do them? What's actually powering these responses? Let's take a closer look. Hidden inside is a thought, often unconscious. Psychologists call this an automatic thought. It just pops into our heads. Usually, we don't even know we're thinking it. Take these two, for example. They're in a meeting and she interrupts him. His automatic thought might be, she's trying to make me look stupid. And because it's automatic, he doesn't even think to challenge it. Instead, he gets angry and lashes out with a sarcastic response. So here's one way to look at unproductive conflict. There's an event, the interruption. We have an automatic thought. She's trying to make me look stupid. And there's a destructive response. In this case, sarcasm. And so, to make conflict more productive, the first step is to understand both this, your automatic thought, and this, your destructive response.
Part 2 and 3 build on proven concepts from the world of psychology, cognitive behavioral therapy. So this approach breaks down like this. In a conflict situation, we have a response. Those two things are connected. But there's more going on between those two things that we may or may not be aware of. When we encounter a conflict situation, we actually have a thought, which evokes a feeling, which together trigger a response. Cognitive behavioral approach aims to help the learner understand this interplay between thoughts, feelings, and responses. For example, when Dave is involved in a conflict situation, he may have a thought like this. If this situation gets heated, it will be awful. That thought will trigger a feeling of anxiety, which together causes Dave to withdraw from the situation and shut down. Without this awareness, Dave is likely to continue to withdraw when faced with conflict situations. But now he's able to connect that a thought can evoke an anxious feeling, which together can evoke a destructive response. Let's take a look at another example with Dave. As a C style, Dave might have a thought like, I can wear this person down with superior logic, because that's something that Dave prioritizes. That thought is likely to evoke a feeling of defiance, which together can trigger an overpowering response to the situation. Both examples show the power of the cognitive behavioral approach. You can see that when the individual is able to connect their thoughts and feelings to destructive behaviors, they are much more knowledgeable of the real root cause of their go-to conflict behaviors. Let's now introduce you to Ron. Ron is an I style. And for those of you who are not quite as familiar with DISC, our I styles do their best to keep things friendly and upbeat. They tend to want to be well-liked and are willing to share what's on their mind. In a conflict situation, Ron might have a thought like, you don't care about me. That thought could trigger a feeling of being undervalued, which together causes a more dramatic response than is warranted. Ron may also have a thought like, they're making me out to be the bad guy in the situation, which evokes a strong feeling of insecurity that comes out as gossip. Again, we're trying to connect these conflict situations with the thoughts and feelings that trigger a destructive behavior. In the facilitated learning process, we spend some time focused on destructive responses. Why do we respond destructively? We're trying to help people understand first, what are those behaviors? And second, why do they behave that way? For many of us, conflict situations are threatening and it's our instinct to protect ourselves. And we do it so quickly that we don't even think about it. But under the surface of our consciousness, there's a process that's playing out. A conflict incident triggers an automatic thought, which in turn triggers a destructive response. Much of it is habitual and outside of our consciousness. From there, the profile introduces common destructive responses and asks the learner to select the 3 responses they call on most frequently. They are asked to work backward by checking the behaviors that others use that are frustrating or annoying to them. And from there, we ask them to put a star by the behaviors they tend to use. Sometimes they are even the same. Now, this exercise helps people see what they tend to use and why they are destructive. By focusing on these destructive behaviors, we are helping people connect these behaviors to real situations in the workplace. From there, the learner receives 6 pages that provide individuals with an explanation for why they do certain behaviors. All 6 pages are personalized and presented to the learner through the perspective of their DISC style. In addition, each behavior provides the learner with the possible automatic thoughts that likely lead to the behavior. We present with each of the 18 destructive behaviors the automatic thoughts that might be leading to this response. The intent is to start connecting the automatic thoughts specific to the learner that trigger their own destructive responses. Next, page 19 looks at specific automatic thoughts based on DISC style and allows the learner to personalize the profile further by checking the automatic thoughts that resonate with them. The learner then reflects back on the situation they listed on page 10 of their profile and is asked to provide what the automatic thought might have been in that situation and the destructive response that was triggered by that thought. For Ruby, she now understands how her automatic thoughts influence her behavior and can ask herself, how can I change my responses in conflict? Which takes us to part 3, changing behavior and choosing more productive responses. Part 3 is all about helping the learner take action. It focuses on catching and reframing automatic responses, then offers actionable tools to continue evaluating and improving conflict experiences. Let's take a look at the introductory video to part 3.
So now you know about automatic thoughts and how they can sometimes get us into trouble during conflict. But the good news is we can disrupt this process and change our responses by stepping back and reframing. When we step back, we pull ourselves away from intense emotions like anger and anxiety that might be clouding our judgment. And we reframe by evaluating our automatic thoughts to see if there are other ways to think about the situation. So it looks a little something like this. Remember this guy? He got interrupted. And his automatic thought was, she's trying to make me look stupid. Then he got angry and lashed out with sarcasm. But let's rewind. What if this time, instead of letting his anger get the upper hand, he steps back from his emotions by acknowledging his automatic thought, and he reframes by challenging it. He asks himself, is that actually true? Am I overreacting or exaggerating the problem? Is there another way I could look at the situation? And yeah, most of the time he'll probably discover that there is a more realistic way to think about it. Instead of, she's trying to make me look stupid, he can look at this as, she was just focused on making her point. Or maybe, she probably didn't realize she cut me off. And now that he has a broader perspective, he can make an informed choice about how he wants to react. Maybe he wants to pull her aside and address the situation. Maybe he asks her to give him a moment to complete his thought. The point is, now he has a choice. And so, if we wanted to map the whole situation out, it goes something like this. An event triggers an automatic thought. But the trick is, here, we catch ourselves. We step back from our emotions, then we reframe our thoughts. And now, armed with this new perspective, we have our very best chance to resist those destructive responses and choose one that's actually productive.
This concept of becoming aware of your automatic thought is tough. We're trying to help people intercept these automatic thoughts, but they often fly just under the hood of our consciousness. Half the battle is bringing them to the surface and recognizing them. In a facilitated learning session, we use video to demonstrate this concept and help people see how this process can work and become aware of their own automatic thoughts. To demonstrate this, I'm going to show you a clip from the facilitation experience. And while you're watching this, I want you to notice Sally's automatic thoughts and try to pinpoint when Sally's automatic thoughts become harmful to the situation. Let's take a look.
I think they're going to make their goals.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Dante and Tom definitely have that under control.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, it looks like the last thing on the agenda is to let you know that I had to move the next meeting.
Oh yeah. What time?
This afternoon at 4 o'clock.
All right. You know I'm going to be out this afternoon. Why do we have to move it? That doesn't seem fair.
Well, Ryan is out of the office until noon. I can only do 4 p.m. And then Fran and Lou would have to shift another meeting.
Wait, my stuff's important too. I have some things I need to cover.
Okay, well, why don't you let me know what they are, and then I will bring them up for you.
She's not listening to me. She needs to show some consideration. I want to be there, so this afternoon just doesn't work.
We all have to miss sometimes. I will follow up with you after.
Is she cutting me out? She is totally cutting me out. Stephanie, I need to be there, so we're going to have to reschedule this meeting.
Seriously? We're talking about you missing versus 4 people missing.
I'm done. I am shutting this down. No, we're talking about you and Ryan missing the meeting. We're talking about the two of you expecting everyone else to arrange their things so that it works around your schedules all the time.
Sally, we accommodate your schedule too. Where's this coming from?
I'm winning this no matter what. I'm going to talk to Lou and Fran. We're going to reschedule this meeting.
We all have different tolerance levels for destructive behaviors. So what learners do in the facilitated session is learn how to first recognize their own unhealthy automatic thoughts so they can catch and reframe that automatic thought and choose a more productive response. Just as unhealthy automatic thoughts can lead to unproductive responses, our conscious, positive, or neutral thoughts can also help us regulate our emotions and our responses. The cognitive behavioral approach used in Everything There's Productive Conflict teaches learners to interrupt the unconscious cascade of reactions before the situations get away from them. Let's have another look at Ruby and think about how we use the cognitive behavioral approach in real time. Remember, this isn't about conflict resolution. It's about productive conflict in the moment it's happening. Ruby encounters a conflict situation, and her automatic thought is, you have no idea what you're talking about. That thought is going to lead to a feeling of defiance, and she is likely to become argumentative. In the heat of the moment, if Ruby can catch herself and reframe that automatic thought, step back, reframe, and replace that destructive thought with a more positive and generous one, like, he may have a different perspective, I need to listen. That new thought triggers a feeling of openness rather than defiance, and a response rather than becoming argumentative. She is more likely to listen. By catching and reframing that destructive thought to something more productive, she's more likely to choose a productive response in the heat of the conflict moment. This can be tough for people. Often our automatic thoughts and destructive responses have become habitual. Teaching the learner to recognize, catch and reframe, and then choose a more productive response will take motivation and practice. Page 21 offers questions like, is this thought actually valid or true? Am I overreacting or exaggerating the problem? Is there another way I could look at the situation? Beyond those questions, page 21 offers specific examples of automatic thoughts, followed by reframed thoughts. Because once the thought has been reframed, the learner is in a much stronger position to choose a productive response. On page 22, the learner is asked to rate how easy or difficult it is for them to choose among the 16 examples of productive responses. From there, the learner reflects back on their example from pages 10 and 19 and how they may have reframed their automatic thought and chosen a more productive response. That concludes the overview of the personalized learning experience that uses the individual profile and facilitated session. We now move on to the follow-up materials that helps keep everything DISC productive conflict alive after the facilitated session. One of those tools is on page 23, the last page of the personalized profile. This page is a log because we've discovered that sometimes people might encounter specific conflicts with coworkers or a particular person or a time of the day, or let's say they're under a lot of stress. This page starts to look for behavioral patterns that the learner can better understand and change over time. We also offer a reference guide that showcases the 18 destructive behaviors from the personalized profile. So if someone is really struggling with one of them, maybe drama or being passive aggressive, they can actually flip to that page and receive tips on dealing with that destructive behavior and get tips on what might be triggering that behavior. Finally, for ongoing learning, we have a platform offered through Wiley called myeverythingdisc.com. And on this platform, learners can connect to their coworkers, run comparison reports, and access DISC-style podcasts to learn more. If you would like an overview of myeverythingdisc.com, you can go to our website, carverassociates.com, click on the resources tab and on-demand webinars, and there you should see the My Everything DISC showcase where we can give a walkthrough of these resources. With that, I promised you a case study, and we have a powerful story to show you how everything DISC productive conflict has impacted the United Brotherhood of Carpenters. Let's take a look.
UBC exists for the express purpose of improving the lives of carpenters and their families so that we can stand together for wages and benefits and work conditions. When the time crunch comes and the boss is saying, we got to get this done, we got to get this done, temperatures go up.
When you have compressed schedules, tight profit margins, that many people doing different things on a project, conflict is an everyday part of our life. We strive for a constructive culture in everything we do. Everything DISC is a tool that we use to ensure that that constructive culture takes place every day.
Utilizing Everything DISC products within our programs brings validity to what we're doing. It really just emphasizes the things we're trying to accomplish. And for someone to self-assess and get results that were not told by someone else, but that they brought to the table, I think that the impact on them has a lot of value.
It just made me more conscientious of how I communicate with others and how I'm coming off to others as I try to communicate to them.
Interesting how you took all these questions and the next thing you know, you have this profile on yourself. If you really looked at it and go, wow, I can improve in this part, or I am strong in this part where you didn't think you were.
2 or 3 minutes into the report, you can see the faces change. They're punching each other saying, look at this is so me. It's not that they're just evaluating themselves, that they're eager to get other people to give them insight.
Offering and providing soft skills to our members, to our staff, gives them additional tools outside of the hands-on training. And it really just helped boost them as people, but also just as members of this organization, that they're just better all-around people.
It causes you to look at yourself at face value and to realize that you can change in certain areas. That's going to help you become a better person, in which that's what it actually did for me. How I approach different things with my son, with my wife. I mean, it really impacted me.
By combining the personalized insights of DISC with the proven science of cognitive behavioral therapy, Everything DISC Productive Conflict helps each participant effectively respond to the uncomfortable and unavoidable challenges of workplace conflict. The result is a culture that harnesses the power of conflict to improve relationships and drive success. I'll end with this question for you to reflect on. What does productive conflict look like in your organization? If you have any questions, please reach out to us with the contact info on the screen or through a contact form on our website. With that, thank you for watching and have a great day.